Well, good evening and Happy New Year to everybody. And first meeting of the year. And good evening, Council. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome Councilwoman Rollins to the dais tonight. So happy you're here. And we are going to get started right away. We have a proclamation that we're going to start off with tonight. Dr. George, did you? Oh, these masks just screw me up. Sure, absolutely. Why not? Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Whereas the United States was founded upon the principle that all people are created with inalienable right to freedom, and a 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution, making slavery illegal. And whereas slavery within the United States today is most often found in the form of forced labor and sex trafficking, which weakens our social fabric, increases violence and organized crime, and debases our humanity. And whereas this problem and heinous crime is found within our own community, and whereas the Iowa Network Against Human Trafficking and Slavery has been working since 2005 to abolish all forms of human trafficking through education, volunteerism, advocacy, and collaboration. And whereas every business, community organization, faith community, family, and individual can make a difference by choosing products that are not made by forced labor, by working to protect our young people from sexual exploitation, by addressing the problem of internet sex trafficking and pornography, and by becoming more aware of the problem and possible solutions. Therefore, I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim the month of January 2022 as Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. I encourage all of our citizens to become more familiar with the problem, to be vigilant and report suspicious activity, and to work towards solutions to end trafficking in all its form in our community. It's my honor to present this to Dr. George Blissos, who has tirelessly worked on his behalf. So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do you want to introduce?
Would someone be kind enough to take our photo?
How about Susan or
Susan, would you?
or Brian can?
How do you do it now? Oh, he's got it.
Okay.
Who's in charge here, George?
I'm trying.
George is.
All right.
Well,
Yeah, no one can see it. Thank you, Brian.
go ahead. Here it is. Keep going.
Yes, just a few words. First of all, thank you, City Council, for standing by our side in the fight against human trafficking. I do have just one really good report to give you on the progress that we're making. Statewide, last year, 558 women became survivors in Iowa. Many of them were served by residential programs, two of which are here with me tonight. And if you don't mind just for a minute, I'd like for them to introduce themselves and the agencies in Ames that are doing this very difficult work. If you guys would come up and give your name and the agency you're with.
I'm Angie Bright, the executive director, and I'm with Wings of Refuge. We're a restoration home in the Ames area.
I am Josie Rodriguez, and I am a housing advocate with Access Assault Care Center here in Ames.
My name is Jasmine Diaz, and I work with Access as well. I do the diversity advocacy. Mainly, I work with them closely to make access to people who don't really come from this country. So It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And Josie, by the way, is a ISU graduate. When she was at ISU, she was the president of the ISU Student Club Against Human Trafficking. One more good report to give you. Last year, there were 14 convictions in Iowa of traffickers, double the year before. And the best part of it was that all 14 that were prosecuted are in prison. 2 of the 14 admitted their guilt. All the others went to trial. The 2 that admitted their guilt were based in Iowa City. They and another trafficker had a very big sex trafficking syndicate trafficking young girls. And the Iowa City Police Department had so much good, solid court-ready information that 2 of the 3 admitted guilt, and they're both in prison. The 3rd stood trial and was convicted. So we're making great progress. And it takes all of us working together because this is an unseen crime. It's hard to identify. And the more people we have that are aware of the problem, the more that we're going to be able to bring to justice the traffickers and rescue and bring into the light the victims. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to consent agenda. Council, does anyone want to pull any item from consent tonight? Seeing none, entertain a motion to approve consent.
Move consent. Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. We're moving on to public forum. Once again, this is a time we set aside for comments from the public on topics of city business, other than those listed on the agenda. And please understand, we will not take any, council will not take any action or have any discussion on these items. And I'm going to limit people's comments to 3 minutes if they would. And I have 2 cards. One is Richard Dio.
The doorbell rang in my apartment. 2 policemen answered. Put your clothes on, one of them orders. I have some bad news to tell you. What's that, I asked you? Put your clothes on first.
Richard,
And
please.
don't you ever
Richard,
answer the door wearing your clothes.
Richard, please. This is not city business.
This is my apartment and I'm the only person
Richard?
in it.
Please stop.
A second time, a third time.
Richard, I'm going to gather you out of order. Please sit down.
I was born naked, I should die naked.
All right, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break.
What about your brothers and sisters? They asked. I'll be the first to die.
Address council.
Hello, my name is Sue Ravenscroft. I live at 455 Westwood Drive. And I'd like to wish you all a Happy New Year and special welcome to Ms. Rollins, who is the new representative of my ward, I'm proud to say. I sent the council a letter about issues that you will address as you work on the developers agreement for the reinvestment project, and that's included in council communications. I addressed a lot of issues in that letter, but I'm here to reinforce the urgency of one particular issue. If we don't address climate change, all the other issues become less consequential. So I was very pleased by the December timing of your vote to lower emissions by 2030, because that reinforced the conclusions reached at the Glasgow Climate Summit. One of the primary messages that came from Glasgow was that government entities such as cities should be careful to avoid lock-in, i.e. to stop it immediately. Lock-in occurs when decisions are made now that the city makes or allows that will cause long-term emissions to continue or grow. I read the minutes of your December meeting, I wasn't able to attend, and saw that some of you were concerned about being seen as promoting idealistic goals that you wouldn't be able to follow up on. So if Ames is really serious about lowering emissions, and I hope you are, then you need to ensure that the massive reinvestment district project, nicknamed the LINK, meets building design standards that are compatible with your long-term goals to lower emissions. I'm not an engineer, but there are many people in the city who have a lot of technical expertise. You had lots of volunteers for the Supplemental Input Committee, for instance. You selected people who are concerned and knowledgeable. Their input could be very valuable here. I do know a little. I know that there are 3 different types of building certifications: LEED, WELL, and EDGE, and that building in low emissions is less expensive than retrofitting. It also allows for more options as you're facing the construction process. So if the highly visible and very massive LINK project is to be the catalyst that you've talked about, Tim, then it should not be built in the old, traditional, less environmentally efficient ways. A catalyst generates change, not the same old, same old. This is your first chance, and it's a highly public and visible one, to show that your vote in December was meaningful and that you intend to act on it. I have to go to another meeting, but I will be watching Channel 12, and I will look forward to the disposition of communications. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to address council on under public forum on any items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close public forum, and we're going to move on to item number 20, staff report regarding Grove Avenue redirection area.
So tonight you have really our first foray into Plan 2040. We had a referral request from the neighborhood before the adoption of Plan 2040 this fall, and City Council took this request to consider the area that's outlined in red here that's zoned RH. And the neighborhoods asked, would we be willing to consider a change of the zoning in this area, principally to address the concern about commercial development options along this Grove Avenue and the back here with Grand Avenue. We had a request a few years back for exclusively a commercial building that the council did not take up, and it's been as is since then. But we have seen at the corner at the corner here that there's a redevelopment project of the Mary Kay Flowers site into a mixed-use apartment and commercial site. So it does show that the zoning does matter. There are options for people to intensify development in this area, And that really kind of spurred the neighborhood to bring the issue back to the city council. In Plan 2040, this area was designated with a redirection area label. Now, we have those in a variety of places across the city. They were really a label to help us understand where there's a possibility of change and that the city council may want to look into that in greater detail before that change occurs, or to think of it in a more collective sense rather than a site-by-site request. So it's really a designation to think about a study for an area. There could be different outcomes. Some redirection areas, we may want to intensify zoning in those areas to allow for or encourage greater redevelopment. Some of the areas like this, they're a transition area from a mix of maybe existing uses to a different use that's across the street or into the neighborhood. And we might want to look at, again, how exactly are these uses planned to work into the future? Or do we want to encourage redevelopment? How should redevelopment occur is also a question that belongs in the redirection area discussion. So tonight we've provided to you a few different options. The properties are zoned RH. You can see that all along Grand Avenue, where there were a mix of multifamily kind of buildings that were built generally in the 60s and 70s, we kind of made it uniformly the same RH zoning district across the board. And the neighborhood is asking for us to consider what could be characterized as a down zone from RH to RM. Medium density allows for all of the housing uses that are already in the block, but it takes away the mixed use commercial option, and it does reduce overall intensity to some degree. We gave you a little bit of the numbers behind this. There's about 25 housing units out there, and there's a little bit of a difference between medium and high density zoning about what you could yield with more redevelopment or redoing the block. Staff wasn't so much focused on the concern of the commercial use. We aren't concerned that the area is likely to become commercial. It's clearly a possibility with someone acquired sites and wanted to look at mixed use the way the Mary Kay site was developed. For the most part, we think it's more of a question about what's the compatible residential use over the long run. We're probably indifferent about the commercial. We don't have any goals for commercial development here. So that particular issue of commercial could be resolved with or without changing development intensities here. But really, when we started to look at this, we had the questions come up. What does council want to see out of the redirection area? Are we about compatible intensification? Are we about transition here? What are really our goals? You have two competing interests. We highlighted that in the report, that in this case, the comp plan is saying, yes, we like infill, but we also want design compatibility and transitions into lower density areas. In this case, it's an existing development area, so we're talking about redevelopment, and it's a very narrow area, so it's not a broad neighborhood that we're talking about transitioning. It's really just this half a block, or I should say the one side of a block. So we outlined a couple of different options for you. I think we would recommend that in some way, there's probably a need for a design transitions here so that redevelopment, if it does occur, it does have more of a residential character along Grove Avenue. It's not about density. It's about design transitions here to us. And I think we can accomplish that in either RH or RM zoning. So we're really interested to hear what direction City Council wants to give us and understand what our next steps are. And then I can answer questions about next steps when I have a better idea of what City Council is interested in.
Questions for Kelly?
Kelly, when we consider the sorts of things that we could put in an overlay, is it possible to separate out some sorts of commercial uses from other sorts of commercial uses, given the sorts of definitions that we already have in our code?
We can. I think the one concern I had was if every redirection area became its own zoning district, it can be done. It's a little bit more cumbersome in terms of every time having to revisit the list of uses and what the expectations are. It can be done. We have two examples of very small zoning districts in the city that are very much single purpose. We have a one that says, there's a limit on the commercial height off of, it's one of the examples that down south, right off of Duff, where it says you have to, have to have doors that engage the residential side. Essentially, it's against big box construction, having the rear of a building against it. It's the whole purpose of the zone. Never will be used anywhere else. and really only deals with one or two issues. So it can be done. It just isn't as effective or efficient for us to do that repeatedly across the city.
Do we have many of the zoning districts where you have RH on one side of the street and low density on the other side of the street?
I mean, you can see it on this map. It's very common in this particular area, either that you cross at a street or in the rear yard. So Ames has a pretty good mix of areas that you just think of as large areas of apartments that are definitely zoned RH. And then we have a number of these kind of narrower strips or smaller areas from longer ago that were developed, again, in the 60s or 70s, where there's no buffer, no transition. It's just a hard line right at a street or in the backyard. So these do exist in other areas of the city. This one's unique, obviously, that it's on the backs up to a highway across from a mall and from a Walmart. That's the unique component here.
I know we have a number of these over in Campus Town.
Yeah, so there's those kinds of scattering of RH up against other single family areas in the Campus Town or to the west of campus area.
Other questions?
Kelly, if this property was to redevelop, could you speak to the issues of access? How would the properties be accessed? Are there possibilities of access off Grand, or would they be limited to access off Grove?
So for no, I can't believe DOT would give access from Grand. We didn't ask them. In no situation have I seen them be willing to grant access to a highway when it doesn't already exist. So it would have to come from a local street. And so for the most part, especially all the internal properties would definitely have to come off of Grove Avenue.
You don't happen to have a photograph of this area just for people to conceptualize if they're not familiar with this area? I pulled it up on Google Maps, and that's been sort of helpful to.
So the best I have is the only aerial I have in here. So again, you have Northwood at the top and Duff Avenue at the south. So you can see there's a Northwood driveway here that exists to that threeplex, I think is what it is. No, it's a sixplex. It's conceivable if that property redeveloped that the access would be from Northwood, but that would have to get revisited through the traffic engineering division about what we have driveway spacing standards and whether that could be met or not from the intersection. So it's conceivable that one property could potentially have Northwood access, but I think everything else would have Grove Avenue access.
Man, I think it's an important point. Obviously, if there are changes in use, how those properties are accessed, there's more traffic on the Grove side, then it's obviously a bigger concern for the neighborhood. Thanks.
Anything else? All right, well, a number of cards from people that want to address council. So I'm going to call individuals to the podium, and I just ask you to introduce yourself and your address. And if you could try and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, I'd appreciate that. We'll start with Marie Meyer.
My name is Marie Meyer. I live at 607 River Oak Drive in Ames, and the east side of my property abuts Northwood, and I am in the Northwood Overland Neighborhood Association. I actually have some questions. I don't understand for sure what infill means. To me, it sounds like you want to put some things between what's there. Is that what that is? And overlay zone. I'd like a little better description of what that is to better understand it. Some of the things that I noticed, the statement says more attention to design requirement and neighborhood context is desirable to compared to current standards. I think that sounds good. Like you want to be more sensitive to what's there and that there's real people living in this neighborhood than just looking at a map and drawing things out. But I'm not sure what is meant by design standards. It does sound like the recommendation is not for commercial. And I understand that while it said there are no goals for commercial, so nothing needs to change to keep it out. On the other hand, time does move along and things change. And if it's not specifically zoned to not be commercial, chances are it's just sometime in the future you're going to have a group of neighborhoods here again, but this time complaining that there is commercial in their neighborhood. This doesn't affect me quite as directly. The traffic on Northwood would. But overall, it affects me because it's part of the neighborhood and the feel of it. And being in a residential neighborhood, all of us on purpose moved to a residential neighborhood, noticing where commercial buildings were. This would change it for part of the neighborhood if commercial did not become available to developers. You noted that there's obviously mixed use at where Mary Kay's was, but Mary Kay's had been a business for a long time. And actually, she and her daughter were also part of the neighborhood association and came to our picnics. And I think some of that, they were part of our neighborhood. And a flower shop is quite different from having a different kind of business. And adding the cafe was definitely a plus to the neighborhood. One of the things, I strongly support option one. Just rezone it to medium. Make sure I got it right. Yep, option one. I don't think you'll find any pushback. As I understand it, where there is a single family dwelling under RM, that could still be replaced by a multi-unit building. It's just it must conform to the standards of no more than, I believe it's 4 stories, and nothing there is more than 3. And that would still give some of the flexibility if your idea is you need more places for people to live. I noticed that doing the overlay, which we kind of got caught in between here. This process was initiated last April. Here we are now, it's January. And while this has been dragging its way through, perked up a little in October when all the neighbors came in, it's been a while. And it was noted that doing the overlay or template, looking at that, would take the most time. And since it's going to be the first one the city does, I expect it to take considerably more time than the other templates would take in the future. I shouldn't say we, I should say I did not know that this process would butt us up into the development plan where we would hit against, this would be a good place to try out an overlay. We didn't have a heads up on that. I guess that's neither here nor there. It's just kind of frustrating. But it's a pretty small piece of land. I don't see how it's a loss to the city to take it to medium when the housing density could still be stepped up a little without changing the flavor of the neighborhood. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Leo Millman.
Good evening. Leo Milliman. I'm 3112 Northwood Drive in Ames, and I am president of the Northwood Association. We started it, and we have several speakers. I'll be real brief, but I got to share with you, there are several others wanted to be here, but because of COVID protocol, chose not to be, which I respect, you respect, and some other emails to me. Basically, everybody that I've talked to that has talked to me wants this to be downzoned. They don't want it to be a high density area. By history, I know this in 1997 used to be a low density or residential area. The city rezoned a lot of things and suddenly made that little strip high density. And if I have read the report, thank you. And thank you, council, for letting us talk to this, putting in an agenda item. And thank you, P&Z and staff, for digging out, doing a lot of work. I've read this several times. It looks to me like if it's not rezoned, it is possible to put a 9-story apartment building there. Then we're going to be dealing with parking and so forth. The concerns the neighborhood has is traffic, parking. We like our residential area. And I've studied at least I've read the 4 options. A little sideways humor. I think P&Z, when they write a report like this, has their own P&Z speakease, which I'm guilty of in medical speaking and legalese. We all have to hire somebody else to interpret what is meant here. The big question here, what I have, option 4, I don't understand overlay and the language design overlay put in. And I think everybody in my neighborhood who has spoken to me has the same concerns. Anyway, we like our residential area. I'll let the others speak, to be brief.
Thank you. I forgot to mention to Marie and also to Dr. Milliman, I'm writing down the questions and we'll make sure that Kelly answers the questions after you're all done speaking. I'm not trying to ignore them. It's just it's easier for us to gather them all together and then I'll address them to Kelly and ask him to respond. Okay, Bob Long.
Bob Long, 3124 Grove. I'm not sure if all of you were here when I and my neighbors spoke last fall. Maybe all of you were. I don't know if there's any new faces or not. But at that time, I told you, I'm directly across the street from this area, and I am not in favor of any commercial, black and white. I don't know what, as Leo mentioned, we don't know what all this infill and overlay, and that's a new term that got shoved in here in the last couple of days when we read the staff report. We really don't know what that means. But what I can say is that 3 years ago when Sherwin-Williams made their pitch, you turned it down pretty quick. The same reasons you turned it down 3 years ago still exist today. I'm going to say I'm pretty confident. Kelly, you made a statement at that meeting. I recorded it. We haven't seen any commercial development in RH districts because someone asked you that in the comments with you. No, we're not seeing that happen. And so nothing was done about the high zoning, the high density at that time. Perhaps it would have been if you had said, yeah, they're popping up all over the place, but they weren't. My contention is that if Sherwin-Williams had wanted to put 3 apartments on top of their building, I'd be looking at a Sherwin-Williams today. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry, is it Walters? Walters? I'm sorry.
My name is Larry Walters. I live at 3111 Grove. I'm in the district that we're talking about, and I hope it is rezoned down to no more than medium density. So we have apartments there now. They seem to work out well. I figure Grand Avenue makes a good barricade, keeping the commercial on the west side, residential on the east side. And I don't think that street would be conducive to traffic commercial besides, especially would really bother the people across the street if that was commercial and the housing on the east side of Grove would have trouble because of the parking situation, getting in and out of their driveways, and also the ones that were on the west side would also. So I don't think, and it's a short street, I don't think it'd be conducive to get, it wouldn't be really visible for commercial, I don't think. Really, you'd have to have the entrances probably on the east side or on the facing Grove. They wouldn't be too visible from Grand Avenue anyway, so I don't think it would really be a wise thing to zone or keep it as it is, or I think to zone it down to medium density that allows houses and apartments would be the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you say you live on the zone, it's actually you do live in the RH zone area. You live on the west side of Grove. All right, Greg Fisher.
I'm Greg Fisher. I live at 630 River Oak. I also have a property with a garage on it on my property that's on Grove. I'm at the southern end, kind of in between. At the corner, it's a T intersection. That's where my house is at. I think we have some issues already with what's going on. Just to change in our Walmart from a small Walmart, a really, really tiny Walmart to a mega store now has created issues immensely already with traffic coming through. They cut through our corner all the time now. Used to be a very quiet, really reserved neighborhood. They're coming screaming through there. Used to have 3 neighbors lived right across the street from me, 3 young kids. Unfortunately, they moved last year because he lost his job at Iowa State in the economy. Those 3 kids didn't always stay on their property. I always worried about something happening to them. I don't see that getting any better if we change and have larger apartments or have commercial properties, because they're all going to be coming down that road. It's a huge concern. I also believe that when you start something and you designate it, that's where it should stay. And when it was designated originally, it was medium density. And we said, well, no, let's move it a little bit. Let's change it and let's make it high density. Because in the future, we might do something. Well, a promise when somebody buys that property should stay that promise. And I realize I came a little bit later, so I'm kind of in that tweener. So I wasn't informed about, because I'm 12 years into my property, I wasn't informed that, hey, they could all of a sudden have 8, 9, 10 floor places, and we could all have all these people there. So that's hard to take when I believe that I'm going to have a neighborhood that's going to be a nice, diverse neighborhood with great people that I know. If I have a 10-story building or 9-story building, I'm not going to know those people. And that's the nice thing about our association and our people around us. We know them. Thank you.
Thank you. And Brent Thomas.
I'm Brent Thomas, 3117 Northwood, and also my wife has given me permission or trust to speak for her as well. I hope I live up to her trust here. First of all, thank you very much. I know some of you personally, and this is the first time since 1986 we've lived here that I've been in these chambers, and I want you to know that there's a lot of people like me who appreciate the work you do behind the scenes, and we have I think there's a lot of trust in this group, and I just have appreciated that over the years. So, and as well as the staff that we have in our city. So thank you very much for understanding my neglect of saying thank you as well. Well, first of all, I live at 3117 Northwood. We do, and it's about we are about a block east on Northwood, and there are about 3 houses between us and Grove. We I too, as could be expected, we don't want higher density. We don't want commercial traffic in the area. We enjoy the company of one another. We have a great kind of a defined niche neighborhood there that I've been in other parts of Ames, and sometimes that's hard to come by. And so just in terms of the well-being of people there, I think it's a great place to be, and would not want to see that threatened. We do a winter doldrums party at our house, and 30-some people come. There are donuts on the driveway. You know, we have a neighborhood party that's on the street and block off and that type of thing. So there's those types of things that are happening right now anyway, and I suppose in the future. But obviously also that neighborhood in terms of foot traffic, it's not conducive to well tailored for foot traffic, if that's going to be an issue here. Also higher density, that type of thing. It's a tough place to see that happening in our area. So I would just concur with pretty much everybody that's spoken before. I'm not going to repeat that. So thank you for the opportunity to share here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brent. That's all the cards I have. Is there anyone else who wants to address council? Okay, we're going to close public input. And Kelly, could you, before council takes up further discussion, there were 3 questions. One was, you kind of help people understand what infill means, and then overlay zone, and then also design standards.
Right. So infill has a couple of various meanings. The more obvious version, which is not this site, would be if you had a vacant site in the middle of the city that nothing had ever been built on, and you're infilling that vacant site with something that's never been there at all. We don't have a lot of those in Ames. That's not the pattern that Ames has had over time. So for us, infill typically means replacing something that's there. And in this case, the obvious candidates would be as if a homeowner that's living in a single family home looked to sell their property, they may get more money for it as a redevelopment option to add some kind of multifamily structure to the property. They may not. It isn't a given that it's more valuable than a single family home. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Size of the single family home, how easy is it really to configure units on a property? So infill can mean redevelopment, or infill can mean let's fill in a vacant spot in the city. So here it's redevelopment, and we consider that infill because we're adding density within the footprint of the city that already exists rather than expanding out. The second question I think was overlay. So in a zoning ordinance, we address a lot of different issues with how you use your property. The 2 most obvious are typically what use can I have? Can I have a single family home? Can I have a gas station? Can I have an apartment building? Along with that, we often have site standards. Most people would think of setbacks as how far away do I have to be from a property line. So those are the base zoning standards that we use. So like on the map that's on the screen, you see the light beige tan, that's RL, that's our low density zone standard. You see the orange, that's RH, that's our high density, and you see commercial and some other things. In some parts of the city, in addition to those base requirements, we add an overlay. So in the historic district, you have medium density zoning plus an historic district overlay. Just at the very top of this map, you'll see a crisscross hatch over part of that green area. That's the very edge of an environmentally sensitive overlay. So that property is zoned ag, but it has an environmentally sensitive overlay on it. So we use overlays to either add restrictions to a property to recognize that it's a little bit different than everywhere else in the city. But usually you're using the base zoning in place for uses, maybe setbacks. You might add standards, you may pare down the allowed uses. Sometimes in a unique situation in other parts of the city, we've used them to add design standards or to maybe augment our preferences for how we want to see things be done in an area without trying to restrict it more, but maybe to try to further our design goals with those. So it is a zoning tool. It's something that gets added in on top of what we call our base zoning districts. And we have probably like 12 different ones of those right now across the city in different formats. And then the final question, what would option 4 essentially be, which is to add design standards. So in our RM and our RH base zoning districts, we have very vanilla, plain standards. It's a front yard setback, a rear setback, and a side setback, and you got to provide parking, and that's about it. Or there's a height limit too, but as we've heard, it's theoretically you can go to 9 stories here, which isn't reality, but theoretically. So design standards in some of our other districts. So if you take a neighborhood commercial zone, we have a bunch of design requirements about how the proportions of the building are done, how a front door has to relate to a street. Some other examples would be in the South Lincoln mixed use area. We have standards there that talk about the proportions of the roof, trying to kind of mimic that craftsman or smaller bungalow style of home for architecture if someone was to do a new structure in that area. The single family conservation overlay is another good example where it talks about that you have to have a front door that faces the street. You can't build apartments that are all accessed from the rear. You can't access them all from the side, so that apartment structure fits in more into that single family type of neighborhood. In that case, again, it's zoned RM, but it has the single family conservation overlay on it. So apartments are still allowed, subject to council approval, but they have to meet these single family type style requirements. So that option 4 would probably go down that path, trying to look at, and we mentioned that, is it about, and this came up as one of the questions, is it about this area, so a couple of acres, or is it about a general standard for design compatibility that we might use again across the city? So in option 4, if we went that path, staff would probably first look at it. Is it kind of a universal thing that we should look at for the whole community that we can repeat and use again? Or if that doesn't seem workable after we have some outreach meetings and discuss what's the goals here, council could tailor it to that area as well through an overlay option. So those are kind of the 3 different technical terms that we were applying to this area.
Thank you. All right. Additional questions from Orford Kelly?
I have just a few more. So we've heard from one owner that's in the target area. Could you describe for council the what went on in terms of providing notice to the people that were in this area, and have you received any kind of feedback from the other owners?
There's been no notice. So this is just a referral for council to discuss. So there's been no action to notice, no direction by council to host any meetings of any type. So at this point, other than the neighborhood association has actively requested for us to reply back to them because they know we'd had this referral, that's been the only notification that's occurred, is back to the neighborhood association representatives that asked for this in the first place.
And I think that's valuable for the public and for council. We've only really heard from one owner in the affected area. Kelly, we're going to have over the course of coming years a number of situations where there'll be a proposal for some change in zoning and there will be neighbors impacted. And we know that while neighborhood input is important, it can't possibly be the only tail that wags the dog. We just don't have that luxury. And if we apply that in these situations, we're never going to do anything. And so certainly it's valuable. We want to put weight on that. Could you speak to the issue? We've spent the last 2 years working on our 2040 plan. Could you speak to the issue of how we should think about this property in light of the broader 2040 plan that we've worked on?
Yeah, I think that's what we wanted to highlight to the council is if we kind of boil down everything that's in the plan to what's really applicable to here, I think you have 2 obviously potentially competing policies. We're supportive of infill in select environments. Well, this is already zoned RH, so it's not even asked to upzone it to reach that infill goal. The second part of that is we weren't trying to upzone or infill everything in the community. We wanted to do it where it could fit. And that's that How is the design work? Are there transitions appropriate? The question of access would be something that would always come up in these kind of conversations. Traffic on a street may or may not be a deciding issue, but it is obviously something that affects people's livability on a street. Doesn't mean it's a functionally deficient street to have more traffic, but there are obviously some changes in character that go along with it. So I think you really have these two questions, and that's why it's a redirection area. It wasn't an obvious answer. If we had a very strong position as a city is that we're maximizing infill at every opportunity, we probably wouldn't have even made it redirection. We would have just left it high density. But it begs that question, is what out there what we expect to see in the future? I think over 20 years, the answer is no, whether it's a single family home changing or is it that sixplex redeveloping into something else? I think some of these properties would change over 20 years. So is it more of a residential scale that we want to see that's transition to the low density? We're not saying low density. I think that's pretty clear. Even the neighborhood's very clear. They don't mind the mix that's there. It's about what are those future replacement structures like, or would commercial practically be able to be added? As Bob said, in that Sherman-Williams conversation, that was a whole land use change request to go from housing to commercial. And the question / suggestion was, well, they could work around it and build a Sherman-Williams store with an apartment above it. They didn't do that. And we had not seen this really happen. Across the street at Mary Kay's is really the first one on a small site like that we've seen across the city. The other RH mixed use are much bigger complexes. They're on Lincoln Way. They're just different. So that's where you're at, Tim, is are we trying to intensify, selectively intensify, and what do we want to address here, if anything?
Thanks.
I think that's why I like option 4 myself. And I don't want the neighborhood to hear that and be afraid of what that means. I think the overlay can be quite powerful. So it could remain high density, but with an overlay, you could control the things you want to control, like building height, for example, and no commercial, for example, would be another thing that an overlay could do to that zone. And my reason is that especially with the 2040 plan and the climate action plan, I am going to be really hesitant to lower zoning categories. I think to be a sustainable city, we have to make really efficient use out of the land that we already have in the city. I'm not saying that I think that it could, that a 9-story thing is good there. So I think the overlay could meet both purposes. So it could control the look and the height of the properties and control any sort of, maybe even get rid of any commercial option there. But it would still allow for a few more housing units in the future at some point if it redeveloped, which is still up in the air.
So Bronwyn and I had a discussion about this before, and I was leaning toward that same conclusion. But as we have sat here talking and listening to the residents, I wonder if we're looking at this the wrong way. If we put an overlay on that property and leave this as RH, are we sending conflicting messages that, for example, someone can make that request for the change and they're encouraged by the fact that it's still RH? So if this is downzoned to RM, we accomplish the same thing as the overlay without misleading people that it's something that could go higher in density. And I beg to differ, Tim, with your statement that only one owner in the affected area is here. Every one of these people is affected by that. And I know you mean Mr. Fisher, who actually lives in this rezone area, but I think that this is something that impacts that entire neighborhood.
So go ahead.
So I have come over to the side of downzoning to RM because it sends a clear message about the expectation rather than maybe opening the door for someone to say, this seems like the city is kind of ambivalent to what could happen here because it's got an RH and then it's got an overlay. Let's see what happens. And may put staff through a lot of work. Now, on the other hand, the other council that reviews this may say, oh, I don't know what that previous council was doing. So RH makes sense to us, we're going to make that request.
There's always a chance of that too.
Yeah, so it's not a clear-cut area, but I think back to the addition of the Union on Lincoln Way, right across the street from housing that is single-family, or actually that case, it's mostly rentals, but they were designed as single-family dwellings, and that building is so out of scale with everything. So either option 1 or option 2, or option 4, sorry, would accomplish a more compatible set of structures, but I don't like the idea of sending a conflicting message.
Kelly, can you comment on the staff report talks about density? They're currently not even at their full density. If someone wanted to buy those property units, they could increase density. Is that correct?
Right. So when we inventoried the properties, every property had at least one additional unit. Some had many, many more that they could add. Obviously, going from a single family home to a multifamily structure is a lot more than one, but everybody had at least one. If you went to RM, the single family homes dropped from 6 to 10 units to be more in the range of 4 to 7 units. So the single family homes still have some option for infill there. It's the sixplex and the larger existing apartment one. If you really were to redevelop, those were the little bit larger sites that maybe had more development options under RH. And lot consolidation is a possibility. This was all as if no one ever bought 2 lots and put them together and tried to do something larger.
Well, if someone's going to try and take this from, if it was kept to RH and they want to do a large project, they need to consolidate a lot of the property probably in order to accomplish that density, it would seem.
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky. You just don't see a ton of single family homes get acquired in a very quick manner typically. Doesn't mean someone couldn't buy and hold over many years and eventually get there. But again, they're all possible. It's not the most common thing that we see.
I just noticed in your staff report, so currently there's 25 units in this area, and that under RM, theoretically they could get to 56. They could actually double the density, even with the downzoning from RH to RM.
Yeah, and again, that's all theoretical.
No, I understand.
So when you layer all those things I talked about with setbacks and parking, the smaller the lot
right,
much less likely to reach maximum density. The larger the lot, still not very likely, but more units would definitely get produced. The efficiency goes up.
Yeah. Other comments or questions?
Kelly, could you speak to the procedure? This is just the first step. I mean, if council were to go along with the proposal to go with an RM or an overlay, there would be other steps. Could you walk the council and the community through what those steps would be?
Yeah, so they're probably slightly different. If we're gonna, well, one's much shorter than the other, I guess. If we decide just go straight to RM, I think to introduce what's going on, the fair opportunity is to host a neighborhood meeting here because it's a city initiated action. So before we put materials together to go through the public hearing process with the P&Z and come back to city council, we would definitely host a meeting of some type, invite property owners to share their thoughts before they get a notice that their property is going to be changed. But RM's already on the books. It's pretty obvious. This is what you would be. This is what you would get. Very cut and dried. We can explain that pretty clearly to everybody because it's already written. Option 4 is a little more exploratory because, like I said, I think we first would want to see if we could develop it as a tool to be repeated in its use. If not, we would want to come back. So there's maybe an iteration in there. We definitely would still have the neighborhood meeting to understand goals for the sites, architecturally, use-wise, put all of that into the mix, probably come up with some options. And then there might be an iterative exercise where we have to come back to the city council and say, really, hey, here's 2 options that are available. Which one do you prefer for us to go down formally and then go through that public hearing process and put that into the municipal code and then do rezoning or adopt design guidelines, whichever final step is necessary.
And I appreciate walking through this. So whatever step we take tonight, it's not set in stone. This is just the first step of a number to reach that goal.
Right.
And And to clarify, certainly I value the input of the neighbors, but the process by law, we have to provide input to the people whose zoning we would actually change. And so you have to hear from these people. So I thank you for explaining the process.
I have one more question, I guess. So this is purely hypothetical, but if you did have RH with no commercial say and say a 4 or 5 story building height limit, and someone consolidated the whole property, again, purely hypothetical. I don't know that that would ever happen, but if it did, would there be a difference with that height limit between the number of units you could get out of an RH property in that way and an RM property in that way?
With the size of the lots we're talking about,
Right.
I have a very hard time believing
Probably
you could
not.
really get over 3 stories. I mean,
Yeah.
4 would be pushing it, and economically, I don't know why anybody would look at anything over 4.
Yeah.
Even at 4, I'm still don't really believe you could do that, because there's such small sites to get those units, and then to have to park it.
Yeah.
You're not gonna be able to surface park it. So you're gonna have to tuck it under the building or do something to create efficiency for those larger buildings to do that. So
with the
there's a
option-
big, and we've talked about this a little bit before, there's a big construction change when you go up. There's a big consideration in the building code about how you mix your accessible units with your regular units, and 3 stories, and the factors about elevators and all these things kind of go into the calculus of, just because I can get those units, it might not be cost effective as I go up.
So option 4 doesn't necessarily gain us more units if, in that case, right? Because RM, they still have room to grow the number of units.
It's
so
just,
option 4 would only sort of give you a template to apply to other areas, maybe.
I think option 4. So are you saying that if we adopt design standards, would the yield be less? I think that's what you're really asking, right? So would the theoretical
Well,
yield
they're worried
go
about
down?
like a 9-story building, and you're saying that wouldn't happen in any case, but in RM it's limited, and in RH with a design standard overlay, it's limited.
Yeah, I'm saying if the only change was to say there was a 50-foot height limit in RH, I think your yield and density would be the same.
As an
If that's
R-
the
as
only
RM.
thing you changed, the height's not going to change the yield on this kind of a situation.
Okay.
And if
I
you
mean,
go-
where other than Campus Town
could you
have we had buildings that's 9 stories tall? You can build that in all kinds of places across the city, and it's not happening. It's only happening in Campus Town.
Sure.
Because the parking is reduced.
Yeah, I see.
It's the parking that's the factor.
Yeah.
And if you did an overlay zone and eliminated commercial and had a cap on the height, wouldn't you be back at RM anyway?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Now that I think about it, we
Well,
might as well
if that's all we were doing, I don't think that's the spirit of option 4. I think option 4 wants to say, should it have a different kind of facade type? Should we have front doors with units going out to sidewalks? Thinking more through the single family conservation overlay kind of approach, or maybe the South Lincoln mixed use, where it's not directly stopping the allowed base uses. It's saying you can only do it in this type of a configuration. So if it's just a height limit or it's just a strike commercial, again, we can do that, but I don't think that's getting to the heart of what staff thinks Plan 2040 at some point wants us to address. It might not be for this block, but it needs to be addressed for the city.
Sure.
What's the likelihood that if we went through the overlay process that this set of standards would be applicable somewhere else, as opposed to just starting this process somewhere else and doing this one RM?
I think it's hard to say. I think it's going to be a learning exercise for everybody that's involved. It might highlight issues to staff that we communicate to council that are like, hey, this might not be a big deal here, but we can see how this might matter across the city and other places. So I think it's really hard to forecast applicability here that's unique versus broadly applying it across the city. And if it's not here, at some point, we're going to go through these conversations.
Other questions or comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I would move option 1, which is the RM downzoning.
Is there a
With-
second?
With a neighborhood meeting before
Yes.
public hearing notices.
With a neighborhood meeting before public hearing notices.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, moving second in. Discussion.
So I'm going to support this, but I think it's valuable to convey just sort of candidly, as I've tried to indicate, this is really just the beginning of a process. And so and I'm not going to speak for the rest of the council members, but for this council member, I think there's value in the process. I think there's value in getting input from a broad cross-section of community. And so just because I take this step tonight doesn't necessarily mean that that's where I'll end up on the other side. But I think just to start the process, I think there's value in that. So I'll be supporting option 1 tonight.
Thank you.
I think the thing that is an overriding point for me is I don't think that this is a typical RH zone. If I did, I might think differently, but because it does not have access off of Grand, I just feel like this is not the kind of infill we're going to see anywhere else in the city. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll see it along Lincoln Way or someplace like that, but it feels unique to me, and I don't think it's a good place to start trying to create a model.
I think access really is a big issue. That's why I
Yeah.
mentioned that. It really changes the nature. If you did have access off Grand, I think this would be a different conversation.
Yeah, I think thinking about it again, the amount of units we'd get down to by a pared down option 4 with height are the same as RM2. Although I see what Kelly's saying in terms of the value of.
Hey, if it's not here, we will be back.
We will do it. Yes.
I mean,
exactly.
this is
Yeah.
this
But
is one of the
simpler
defining.
for you in the meantime, right?
Say that again.
This is simpler for you in the meantime
This,
for
this
staff.
is fairly straightforward, especially if the
Not
people on the
simple.
west side of Grove aren't particularly concerned about theoretical density calculations. Yeah, it's very straightforward.
Okay, good.
All right, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried.
So my only last comment is I think we said it's 3 to 4 months-ish to go through that. Just to be clear, we're not jumping on this in the next 2 weeks. So this is absent any other direction from council. It'll probably be a little bit before we have that neighborhood meeting, but probably later this spring neighborhood meeting and probably start the process. If things really get fired up after the neighborhood meeting, we'll probably be back to get direction from city council. But that's kind of how I look at it. If you have other ideas about how you want us to proceed, then go ahead and
Well,
give us
just a
direction.
word to the audience, and that is, council at least once a year gets a list of the list of work things that planning and zoning works on, and it is probably the busiest, the most complicated department we have, except for city manager. No, just kidding. And so somehow they have to prioritize. And so we have some development projects that are coming down the pipe that are very time sensitive. There's other things. So the comment was made tonight about, we made the request back in, April or May, and why is it taking so long? And it's not that we're trying to kick the can down the road. It's just they're trying to get to it in the workflow, things. And then we have public notices, they have to be printed. And as Tim referred to, there's a process that we're going to go through. So please don't leave thinking that, no, we're just going to push it down the road and hope someone comes through to try and get a project going. That is not the case. It's just, I think what you're saying, Kelly, is if someone all of a sudden came in and wanted to take advantage of the RH, that may accelerate, the decision and the process that Kelly just talked about. But the point is that it's going to take time, but it's because we're trying to get it into the workflow and keep things prioritized. So, all right, very good. Thank you for coming. And we're going to go ahead and move on to item number 21.
Thank you.
Actually, a really good exercise.
All right. Item 21, hearing on rezoning of 23959 580th Avenue from agricultural A to intensive industrial 2, or II, excuse me, and first passage of ordinance. Kelly?
It's a little bit unique. I have a very short presentation about it. It's an existing site that we annexed at the request of the owner earlier this year. And we don't often hear that or see that happen, but the site is built. And we noted in the report that changing the zoning is necessary for the reuse of the site. The conditions of the site, the inspections department and the fire department are very well aware of the building conditions. So the owner's also been in contact with us to talk about the rehabilitation needs just to get the site up and running to reoccupy it. So the zoning's the first step towards that. And then working through inspections and fire will lead to into building improvements and other things that are necessary for occupancy of these structures over time. So if there's any other questions about zoning or process for inspections, I can answer those.
Any questions for Kelly? All right, this is a public hearing, so I declare the public hearing on rezoning of 23-959 580th Avenue from agricultural A to intensive industrial II to be open. Does anyone want to address council on this topic? Seeing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain motion on first passage of ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right, moving on to item 22, hearing a proposal for City of Ames to lease its right, title, and interest to property locally known as 205 South Walnut to Heartland Senior Services for a period of 50 years. And as you will note in the council packet, we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing. We're going to need a continue it because they're still working on the document. So I declare the public hearing on this item to be open and entertain a motion to continue the hearing to January 25th, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Roll, sorry, those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 23, Story County Saturated Buffer Bioreactor Project. Mr. Dunn,
Love this one.
this is awesome.
Yeah, so what we're proposing here is kind of an innovative approach to try to get a number of these small field scale projects done in a short period of time. So the typical way you would do it is you would go work with a landowner, get their buy-in, and then go hire a contractor. And then you go to the next landowner and repeat the process over and over. What we're looking at doing is trying to bundle these together so that we've got a big package of construction projects that can go out at once. We're talking probably 25 to 30. I think we've got 28 property owners or project sites already lined up. So what's in this proposal? Item A is a 28E agreement between the city and the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, where essentially IDOL says, we want to do these types of projects. You, city, if you will go do it and be the fiscal agent and you do the contracting, we IDOLs will reimburse you 75% of the construction cost for these projects. Item B then is a cooperative agreement between the city, Story County, and Story County Conservation Board, essentially saying that 25% local match will be split evenly between the city and Story County. There's one other element of the funding for this that's not a part of the item tonight, but hopefully it will be in the near future. We've partnered, when I say we, I mean Neil Weiss, our assistant director, but partnering with Polk County Conservation on a grant application for the Water Infrastructure Fund, which if we're successful, we'll get that 25% local match reimbursed through a completely different grant project. So if we're successful, we could get these 28 to 30 bioreactor and saturated buffer projects done at no cost. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Don't get news so good all the time.
Yeah.
So could you give us just I know that Iowa State game is on, but just real quickly, give us a condensed version of what is the purpose of this project?
So the saturated buffers and the bioreactors, they're two different ways of intercepting drainage tile off of farm ground. And which one you use really kind of depends on the soils and the slopes and everything that are there.
but there are two different ways of intercepting that and treating the water to remove primarily nitrogen and some phosphorus to a degree, but removing that water before it ultimately makes its way into the local drainage ditch.
Thanks.
John, what sort of contracting would we have to do for this sort of project? Is this something that's semi-comparable to the sort of contractors you would use for tiling a field, or is it water department? Who is it?
It would be contractors that are familiar with doing underground work, dirt work type contractors. For a saturated buffer, it's kind of analogous to constructing almost a septic tank leach field, where you're just intercepting it into a perforated tile and letting it literally saturate that riparian buffer by the edge of the field. The nitrifying bioreactors, you're essentially constructing a trench, putting a liner in it, filling that trench with wood chips, and the bacteria that grow on the wood chips then do the nitrifying of the nitrogen in the water.
Any other questions?
And one more. So is there some kind of testing process to measure the effectiveness of these systems?
You
How do we know they're working?
Yeah, if you install them, you would know that they're working. I mean, if you install the ability to sample before and after,
Correct.
Particularly in the bioreactors, it's easier to do than the saturated buffers. In terms of the nutrient reduction credit that we would be able to bank, though, we would be relying on just standardized performance data that's developed by Iowa State and others.
Great.
So that's how we would quantify the nutrient reduction benefit.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'll open up public comment. Is there anyone that wants to address council on this particular topic tonight? Seeing none. Any further questions or comments?
Great project.
All right. All right, I entertain a motion on resolution approving the 28E agreement for fiscal agent assistance with Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Division of Soil Conservation and Water Quality, City of Ames, and Story County Soil and Water Conservation District.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And I entertain a motion on resolution approving the agreement among Story County, Iowa, Story County Conservation Board, and the City of Ames for funding assistance for water nutrient removal practices.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. John, thank you for your efforts on this. I know we talked about this for a number of years under the CIP project, and pretty exciting to see this innovative approach being undertaken to help improve water quality in Story County. So thank you. All right, item 24, Mr. Com.
Here to answer questions, Mayor.
No formal presentation. I am just kidding. Any questions for Don regarding the item 24? All right, open public comment. Anyone want to address council on this topic tonight? Seeing none, entertain a motion on resolution waiving formal bidding requirements and authorizing professional consulting services contract with MCR Performance Solutions, LLC of Deerfield, Illinois, in the amount of $94,500 for MISO transmission rate review and calculation.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Thanks, Don. All right, item 25, staff report regarding COVID-19 meeting policies. Brian?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. In the past couple of weeks, we've been engaging in conversations with our local medical partners about the status of COVID-19 in our community and the impacts that it might have on us as an organization and as a service provider and an employer. And we've been hearing increasing levels of concern about the rate of infection in the community, and therefore the city staff is going to be implementing a policy that requires the wearing of masks in spaces within city facilities where social distancing isn't possible. So for example, in meetings between city staff and the public, certainly between city staff and other city staff. But one area that we're looking for some feedback from you all is with regard to city council meetings and boards and commissions. We've laid out a couple of different options for you regarding how you would like to approach the question of mask wearing at those types of meetings. So as an example, tonight, we had quite a few people in the gallery at the beginning of the meeting. So many so that it would not be possible to meet a 6-foot separation requirement at a meeting like a city council meeting. So one option the city council might have would be to require the wearing of masks at city council meetings and board and commission meetings. The council could exempt these types of meetings from our staff policy, or the council could pursue some alternative direction, such as going to virtual meetings or hybrid meetings in an effort to avoid creating the contact of multiple people. I do want to mention that this discussion is separate from what we as an organization are required to comply with regard to the OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard regulation. So that regulation we have reviewed and made efforts to comply with, and that impacts our, as an employer of over 100 people, that impacts our, we have a requirement to gather the vaccination status of employees, and those employees who are not fully vaccinated are required to wear a face covering and also submit to regular testing. That's something that's going to be separate from what we're talking about here, which is just gatherings of groups of staff and members of the public and so forth. So I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent that I can, and
questions for Brian?
guide you through this.
Comments?
I think the department heads would like to know how you want to handle P&Z meetings, Parks and Rec Commission meetings, ZBA meetings, Human Relations Commission meetings. I mean, I think we feel comfortable asking people, again, in smaller rooms where you can't separate from over 6 feet, that they wear masks, just like you're doing today. Now, we could have a goal-setting session in here, and with just you 7 and nobody else is here, we could probably sprout it enough that you wouldn't have to wear a mask. You certainly can voluntarily, but we're asking that probably in the smaller rooms where you can't, that even in the commission meetings, board commissions, we would ask that they require people to wear masks at the very least.
So I'm interested in option 1, as opposed to maybe like a hybrid option like option 3. But aside from that, I will follow up with a separate motion about including some other possible accessibility with important meetings coming up, like budget meetings, if there would be the possibility for maybe not a Zoom interaction, but if people could email or call in a question during the meeting while watching virtually, I think it would be valuable for even people that can't physically come to a meeting to be able to still provide feedback at the time of the meeting. So that's my preference, as opposed to maybe running a Zoom meeting and an in-person masked meeting. I think it would just be easier on staff if we were able to have some form of virtual participation, but not necessarily Zoom.
I agree with you, Rachel, about the opportunity to have that phone in, like we do at the town hall meeting, for example. The other thing I was wondering about was, with a city council meeting like this, if we have only a few people in attendance, theoretically, they're just able to distance themselves from others if we don't say the masks are required. And it just seems much simpler to require the masks and say, and please distance if you can.
Right.
And it's also, I think, supporting staff, because we aren't setting ourselves a different standard than the rest of the city is holding.
Okay. Are you prepared to make a motion, Rachel?
Yeah, I would move option 1.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Further discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Go ahead.
All right, then I would move that staff look into options for virtual attendees to participate via phone or email live during a council meeting.
Susan, you want to speak to that?
Is there,
Or yeah, before the motion, I
Yeah,
guess,
I'm sorry.
speaking of.
Oh, no, after, I'm
Is
just
there
want
a
to get ready.
second?
I'll second.
All right, moved and second. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Like we do in the budget meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. We can have a phone number put up on screen and allow people to phone in and have somebody monitor the phone. That's not an issue.
We'll run it out to you, when it comes in.
And just point of clarification,
We'll walk it out.
on the budget meeting, when they call in, do they speak out loud or do they
No.
actually?
Now, we have somebody run the message in. So we basically handwrite it out and bring it in.
They'll have
Just
to
a
give their
point,
name.
just for a point of clarification for public, that it's not an opportunity to start calling in and dialoguing or talking.
No, they actually don't present the question. They would make the comment would be presented. They would not be still on the phone line.
They give
Is that
their name.
consistent with your intent.
They give their name and address just like they would normally do.
Is it, I know that we've got the motion on the table, so is it the intent that we are exploring other sorts of options too, or just whether we could do that particular option? Because it occurs to me at times when we have had overflow situations, we put people in other rooms so that they could then come in and speak at the time they needed to speak. And I don't know whether that is an option or if it's any better or worse than just phone in, but it could be encompassed under investigating other ways for people to participate.
Give a comment.
I mean, sure, that's possible. If we had too many people physically in this room, we could put them in other rooms and people could exit and you would bring them back in. So yes, that is possible.
I'm sure that there are going to be people who are very nervous about attending in-person meetings, and that might be a way for them to come but not be in the crowd and still have a little bit of face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that in our town budget meetings, we don't typically get a lot of phone
I know.
participation.
I know. And I'm mostly thinking about those opportunities that we may have for input on climate action planning or anything else that's a larger issue that may be a little bit more controversial. So I don't know whether that was encompassed under your motion, Rachel,
I
or
think
not.
it would fit with having staff look into options to make it more accessible, but if it's not, I could rephrase the motion.
I think that,
She said it was.
Okay.
Rachel, just to make clarification, is it on the city council meetings to start with?
Yes.
I don't know if we have the staff to handle the phone
Handle all
calls
the
on planning or.
Yeah, I understand.
So city council meetings at least start.
Okay. Got that clear, Amy? Just limited to that. Okay, thank you. All right, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
What happens if someone comes to a meeting and they won't put a mask on?
Very good question. I think that's going to need to be worked out with, I mean, honestly, they're going to be asked to wear one and trying to be very, courteous and strongly encouraged to start with. I was very encouraged tonight that I think all the people who were in attendance, only one person was not wearing a mask and they weren't even asked, or in a couple, but anyway.
Right.
So I think we're going to take that approach to begin with. If they refuse to wear a mask, I think Steve and I and Brian will talk about what are the options, but we're really going to try and want to see that enforced. And we're hoping that this surge is short-lived, hopefully, too. And
That's right. According to our healthcare providers, they're thinking it'll be hopefully it'll subside by the end of February, the latest. So we don't see this as a long term. Hopefully not a long term.
I think it's a really wise way you're approaching it, Council, because we got so many meetings coming up with budget hearings and CIP and workshops, and it's just so much easier for us to be able to engage with staff and for the public to engage too by being able to be here in person. So, anything else you need, Brian?
No.
Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 26, under ordinances, entertain motion on second passage of ordinance revising the standards for detached garages and accessory buildings and non-conforming structures.
One second.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Entertain a motion on second passage of ordinance changing the name of Squaw Creek Drive to Stone Haven Drive.
Move on second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
And entertain a motion on second passage of ordinance amending the parking regulations to incorporate the renaming of Squaw Creek Drive to Stone Haven Drive.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to disposition of communications from council. We have 4 items versus letter from William Fedler from H&B Properties.
I think you should ask for a memo from planning department about this. If you like, if you want to pursue it. Get clarification on the topic. If you'd like.
I would move that we get a memo from staff on this.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Second is letter from Sue Ravenscroft. She referred to that under the public forum this evening.
I don't think any action is required. I think you just take that under advisement when you make your decisions later on.
Doesn't it require that whoever's negotiating the development agreement take it into consideration? I'm trying to get the timing. That was the impression I got.
Well, what do you want to do? You want to direct something from the council now of the developer, or just take it into consideration? Or
No, I would just move that we have, are you doing the negotiation?
I am doing the negotiation.
Okay, so I would move that you take it into consideration as you are working with the developer.
raise the issue with them and hopefully
Yes.
take it to heart, or why they can't do that, or what extent they can't.
I'll second.
Okay.
What does that mean?
It means that
You'll
it's-
mention it to the developer.
Well, and I think it means that Steve explains that we're doing this climate action planning. I think Sue laid out a number of things that were concerns, and I just want to make sure that the developer sees those things, hears them from the city. And not that the city
Requires it.
mandates things, but that it's part of the discussion.
I raised the issue of sustainability with the developer and asked for specific aspects, design aspects, and I was encouraged that the developer, this was not a new concept to the developer,
Mhm.
and this was some of the part of the factors. I sort of share Amber's concern. I don't know really what it is that we're voting for. If it's simply for Steve to say, would you please take this into consideration? I'm not sure how that really accomplishes, but it seems symbolism over substance, but.
I don't want it to be forgotten. And
Well,
so
what
that's.
does it- what does
that's
it
the
mean,
reason.
though?
Well, I don't know because I'm not actually doing the negotiation. That's why I don't want to tell Steve how to negotiate that because that's his job, not mine. But the climate action planning is our job. And I think that's something that we have a concern for, and we're trying to highlight it for those that we work with.
Well, this is, again, substance versus symbolism. If you really want something, we should ask Steve to require this as part of the negotiations. Otherwise, this is just symbolism. I mean, I'm fine with just saying the magic words, but it's really not going to accomplish anything.
Steve knows better what shape that discussion should take, and that's why I'm not telling him. I'm not trying not to micromanage what the city manager does with the discussion, but I think it's important to have the discussion. And therefore, I'm leaving it up to him what that entails. And, if you don't want to vote in favor of it, you don't have to.
But
That's my
I think
intent.
people out there are going to, at some point, expect something more than symbolism. I'm happy to vote in favor of it. I don't want to overthink this.
Well, I think that the point is well taken from the standpoint that one of the things that was mentioned was in the letter was, being built to low emission or LEED gold or, standards or whatever. Those have an attendant cost associated with them. And is it the expectation of council just that it's mentioned in the discussions with that, hey, it's a desire, but not a requirement. If it's a requirement, it's going to be a whole different situation. My take on your motion is that bring it up, that it's been brought up by a citizen. Like them to comment on these items when they come with and go from there, not being a mandate that they have to comply with them. Is that correct?
That is my intent.
You understand the motion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, letter from Sharon Worth and Craig Mars regarding museum capital campaign contribution.
So I actually had a conversation with Mark about this yesterday because it sort of reminded me of the Miracle Park and the decision from the city attorney's office at the time that the city could not legally contribute financially to a project without it prompting, what is it, Chapter 26? So having the project be bid out by the city. And so I talked to Mark about it, and I think there's probably a lot more to it than maybe even what we discussed during the Miracle Park project. So I think we should get a memo from the city attorney before we
I'll make a motion.
discuss this. Yes, that's my motion.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Just a footnote, Mark. I don't know I know you're busy also, like Kelly's office. But I know that there's a little bit of a time sensitivity to this too. So if it's not part of the motion, but you might want to, if you put higher on the review or memo, that'd be, I think, helpful for the history museum.
Could you clarify that schedule-wise? I had the same question. So I certainly agree with Amber's motion, but from a budgeting perspective, let's say Mark comes back even at the next meeting. I'm not pressuring you, but if you did, it was really fast, then we would be back where we are today, and we have to decide, do we want to put it on a future agenda? Is that correct?
If you want to appropriate funds, you have until February 7th. That's your budget time when you want to, if you want to allocate. I'm assuming they want it for next year, right? Next fiscal year.
Yep.
So remember, you wrap up, I think it's February 7th, is it not? And that's when you make your final decisions.
February 8th.
Excuse me, February 7th. 8th? I'll get there. It's that Tuesday.
So
that's when you do
procedurally,
it.
though,
If you want to appropriate funds in the budget for this purpose, you should do it at that wrap-up session.
so, but I mean, are we going to put this on a future agenda, or would it just be included as a possible budget item? That's what I need help with.
Well, we normally, if we're interested in funding stuff in the budget, we bring that up during that meeting. We don't normally
Have it on the
discuss
agenda and
separately.
then have a, right.
Here's what happens. People write you all the time, and what we do is compile all those letters. We give them to you, and you decide at that time which one you want to vote on or not, right? Now, maybe what you're asking is, you want Mark's letter for the 25th, so you know whether it's either legally possible to be considered on the 7th. You want to know on January 20, is that the 25th? Did I get that right? Do you want to get a legal opinion by then, so you know whether it's either should be under consideration, legally under consideration?
Or
February? Is that what you're asking for?
or is the question that you want to actually have it on the agenda to discuss it? Tim, that's the question.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to tease out. I'm not trying to drive an outcome. I just want to know, if we do this step, then what? That's all I'm asking.
We have to decide whether you want to separate this out and give this member its own hearing, because there's a lot of people who've asked for money. Are you going to put all these other items on the agendas other than on the budget agenda?
I see. So,
but you may want to. You may want to. This is so different. Maybe you want to discuss it.
And you will have the opportunity to discuss this at the 7th in terms of the merits, the pros and cons, and whether or not you want to fund it on the 7th. I got me doing
Tuesday the 8th.
The first Tuesday, second Tuesday of February.
okay, so that's helpful. We can just treat this like the other funding request.
But you want to know the legal possibilities first? Do you want it by the 25th, or you want it on the agenda, or just a memo?
If Mark could do that, I think that'd be helpful from the standpoint, and that way, council going into the 7th. Could we change the calendar? Let's be on the 8th.
Okay.
So Mark, if you can do that, it'd be great. Thank you. All right. And then item number 4 is
That was a request by city council.
just an idea on the cost. So
Mhm.
take it under advisement. Unless you have anything that provide you with what you're looking for, Bronwyn?
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Good. All right. All right. All right. Council comments. We will start with Gloria tonight.
Oh, boy, don't start with me because it just went out of my head what I was going to say.
All right. We can come back to you. Jim?
Okay, I've got a couple of things tonight. Sort of a fun thing. I love our Parks and Rec department, and this Saturday at 1:00, there will be a free cross-country ski clinic. We haven't done this for a few years, and it'll be at the Homewood facility. The main person who's in charge is Dr. Greg Welk from Iowa State, phenomenal individual, and that's, again, free.
Is that snow or no snow?
So it's snow or no snow, but following the clinic, there'll be an opportunity, if snow conditions allow, and we've got some in the forecast, to adjourn then and go to East River Valley Park, and we'll ski there. And if you don't have skis, we can help with that. But registration is required, so check with the Parks and Rec, and that's sort of a fun thing the city's doing.
How much is it, Tim?
Let me check my notes. It is free. Thank you for clarifying.
And what time is that again, Tim?
1:00 on Saturday. Great opportunity to learn a new skill and enjoy our beautiful parks. Next Monday is community celebration for MLK, and things have changed a bit. So if you were following in the paper, this is now going to be held at the Ames City Auditorium at 6:30 p.m. So right here in our city auditorium, there will be a virtual component to this. There will be some people who attend, but face masks and social distancing will be required to attend in person. So encourage the community to attend. Jeff Johnson, everyone who's been around Ames for a while knows and loves Jeff Johnson, who is the endowed Iowa State University Association alumni president and CEO, and he'll be a featured speaker discussing Dr. King's impact on his work and life. So I encourage everybody to attend that. And finally, I sent council a set of 9 potential next steps for climate action. So right now, we are waiting for the consultant to come back to us with some recommendations. And so one thing we could do is we could just table the specific things that I have suggested and just sort of bring that up later. I actually think some of these things are things we could move forward on now that would be, there's no real reason to wait on some of these things. And so just look for some input as far as, is that something we should move on now or we should wait? So if you had a chance to see those. So maybe just Mayor, is it permissible for me just ask council if anyone has opinions as far as, is this something we should wait on, or are there some of those on that list that seem attractive that we would move forward on now?
I personally have an opinion, but I think I'll let council, you want to weigh in on it all?
I mean, I think some of them we could start right away, like reaching out to Iowa State and the chamber to begin the conversation of enlisting their support for our cap goal like that.
My opinion is that we discuss it at goal setting.
Oh, there we go.
It's coming up.
I don't know if goal setting is the place to put anything else, because my experience tells me that anything on that schedule
We're there
doesn't.
for a lot of time. Might as well throw it all in.
But I guess I would say I wouldn't want to start anything until after we do the goal setting. So if that works with a discussion at that time, okay, but I'm skeptical.
Goal setting would be good. Goal setting.
It would seem that you're going to start seeing projects, recommendations, a whole list of things coming back from the consultant. I think that should be coming back pretty soon.
Do we have a time frame for that, John?
I don't know if Susan, Susan or Deb, do you have any idea on time frame and when we might start seeing projects coming, or some suggested ways to start working towards the goal and actually have tangible ideas of costs associated with those two from the consultant? kind of catching you off guard, but I think it's germane to the conversation here.
So SSG plans on having information to the steering committee, to all of you, for the March 1st workshop. It may not have all of those details fleshed out, but it's the first swipe at action steps. So they're putting that together right now. And they want to do, between now and March 1st, they want to do another survey. They want to do focus groups. And we have a supplemental input committee meeting to gather all of that input and look at what they've had, what they're putting together. So that would be the first look at their recommendations on action steps.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm fine with waiting until, maybe just if I go real quickly through these, just so people have a sense of what I'm talking about, and then I'll just hold off on this till, is it the upcoming mayor?
Go ahead.
We go through these. So one is to reevaluate our subsidy for LED lighting. We don't have any subsidy now. I'd like to look into that to encourage LED lighting. Review our current program for home and commercial solar, other ways we can improve our solar footprint. Third, look at subsidies for electric car charging stations. 4, develop a campaign to encourage reducing miles driven or leave the car at home by taking Cyride, carpooling, or biking. 5th, have a standing agenda item at the beginning of each council meeting to create opportunities for CAP updates. And this would, I think, be very helpful for us to keep our climate action plan goals in front of us as we go through our meetings. 6, host a workshop for builders on building in a climate-friendly manner, and even considering if there was something like a seal of approval for homes that have been built or modified with climate in mind. 7, reach out to ISU and the chamber to begin the conversation of enlisting their support for a CAP goal. 8, create a fund of money in the budget to begin funding CAP projects yet to be determined. We don't know exactly what these things are going to cost. We know it's going to be a lot. So having a line item and starting to devote some funds, I think, would be appropriate. And finally, asking staff or Steve in particular, to review whether we have sufficient staffing to handle the various efforts such as grant writing and communication with the public that will be needed. I think that we're going to be asking staff a lot, and I just don't know if we have enough staffing. So those are the 9, but I'll hold off. And do I need to make a motion to have something be at the retreat? I apologize, I've forgotten. Or is that something that you can just put on?
I think we can, we'll make sure we put it on the agenda.
Okay, right. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Mayor, may I return to my comments?
You may.
Because one of them was welcoming Anita Rollins to the council. And the other was actually making it plain that the citizens are invited to our goal-setting session at the Homewood Clubhouse at 8:30 a.m. on Saturday, January 22nd. I know in some cases, people have said they didn't even know that this was going on or that they could attend. And I want to make sure that it's on the record for anybody who is watching this and feels they want to join us for that session, which has been so popular in the past.
Thank you.
And that's all I've got.
It's a good point. Is the agenda isn't that on our website as well? Yeah. Okay.
Anita.
I just wanted to thank everyone for the warm welcome to council. I'm excited to join you all in this work. And I also just wanted to thank David Martin for the great work he had done as I was out knocking on doors, his reputation, big shoes to fill. So I'm really excited though, and thank him for the great work that he did here as well.
Thank you. Amber?
Nothing for me.
Rachel?
Nothing tonight.
Rylan?
Nothing for me, thank you.
All right. I do not have anything tonight either. We do have a work session next Tuesday night. It's a CIP workshop.
We'll present a recommended CIP, 5-year plan,
And then we have a few meetings after that.
when we start work.
Get busy. All right. With that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.